One of these three men is an expert on unidentified flying objects. What is your name, please?
My name is J. Allen Hynek.
My name is J. Allen Hynek.
My name is J. Allen Hynek.
J. Allen Hynek came into the UFO field with the typical scientific attitude, which is they shouldn't be studied, there's nothing to them.
Ultimately, that changed, and that's sort of the core of the J. Allen Hynek story.
I, J. Allen Hynek, am a consultant to the United States Air Force on unidentified flying objects.
Like so many other key figures of that era, Hynek had to push against the government that he once worked for and stand up for the truth.
I am also professor of astronomy and director of a large university observatory.
Hynek believed that science was the tool. Science could get us to an understanding of what UFOs are, and that's what he advocated for.
There are a lot of people who don't always understand his rationale for the things he did or the things he said, but Hynek's impact today, I think, is immeasurable.
Only one of these men is the real J. Allen Hynek. The other two are imposters and will try to fool this panel. On to tell the truth.
We get reports every night.
I don't know what the hell it is. It looks like a rotating light around it. I'd like to report a UFO.
The U.S. government closed its formal study of UFOs, Project Blue Book, in late 1969. And the government as a whole says we're not interested in UFO reports.
The Air Force made the decision, let's get out of this business of investigating UFOs. Our business is national security. We've seen no threat. Let's stop Project Blue Book.
J. Allen Hynek, who was the scientist who worked for Project Blue Book for almost 20 years, actually came through that with the opposite perspective, which was that UFOs were something serious and they should be investigated.
In my association with Project Blue Book, I know very well that it was not a scientific project. I also know that they never would notify the media when an interesting case came up. They did everything they could to keep it down. So they definitely withheld information.
Dr. Hynek realized that this was a serious problem. The UFO reports could not all be explained, and that the military should be taking this more seriously.
We now know that there were UFO cases during this time period that did seem to have national security implications.
I know that while I was a part of Blue Book, there were a number of cases that never got into Blue Book.
There are witnesses. This was observed at a missile base. This was observed by an Air Force pilot. You mean to tell me that the CIA or the FBI and the government hasn't investigated this?
I think the public would be shocked to realize that there were incidents going back even into the 60s where our nuclear missile silos were being interfered with.
Production facilities, weapons facilities. We've had incidents over numerous ICBM bases.
During the Cold War, intercontinental ballistic missiles, called ICBMs, were strategically located throughout northern parts of the United States, where they were within striking distance of the Soviet Union. There were almost identical UFO events at two of the Minuteman ICBM locations. At Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota in 1966, and at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in 1967.
My name is Robert Salas. In 1967, I was a lieutenant in the Air Force, stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana.
My name is David Shinley. I'm a retired Air Force captain at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. In 1966, my responsibility was to launch our 10 nuclear-tipped missiles upon appropriate and verified order.
My name is Robert Jameson. I was a first lieutenant in the United States Air Force, Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. One of my jobs was to, if a missile goes off alert for any reason, is to go out and restart it.
The Air Air Force includes missile men. Here at Malmstrom Air Force Base, a strategic missile wing controls the most modern Minuteman in its underground silo. The Air Force specialists on this job, by continuous readiness to launch their bird, help prevent rather than start a nuclear war.
We had Minuteman I missiles, and that's a 800 kiloton weapon. And just for reference, the weapons that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 20 kilotons.
That capability is helping to keep the peace. We have a policy of mutually assured destruction. It would be suicide for us or our potential adversaries to launch a nuclear attack unless they could disable that capability in that system. Then they could conceivably decapitate the United States, destroy the Capitol without fear of a retaliatory response, and change the global balance of power.
Our location was 60 feet underground.
We were very well protected.
It was a concrete steel reinforced capsule.
And this capsule was sitting below what we called the launch control facility.
We had 6 security guards topside. They had the responsibility for making sure there was nobody trying to break in.
I traveled to base to attend the pre-departure crew briefing. After the briefing, several missile crews came up to me and said, "Did you hear what happened overnight?"
Sometime in the evening hours, I get up a call from the main guard upstairs. He tells me that there are strange lights flying over the facility. They're looking at reddish-orange, glowing, pulsating light. It's hovering just above the front gate.
And he pointed with his arms, and he says it was right out there, hovering, motionless and without sound.
He did think that there was a solid object within the light, sort of oval-shaped. I kind of dismissed it. I even said, "You mean like UFOs?" and kind of laughed at him, and he said, "Well, they're not airplanes, sir." About 5 minutes later, he calls back, and he's screaming into the phone. Now, he's very frightened. He's babbling. He said he's got all the guards out there with their weapons drawn. They wanted orders on what to do. I told him, make sure nothing enters the fenced area. When I hung up the phone, I thought we were under attack. By who or what, I had no idea. And then we get bells and whistles going off at our control panel. And we could see the lights going from green to red all across the board, meaning the missiles were inoperable now.
If the president had given the order to launch the missiles, we could not have launched them.
Losing 10 missiles was a shock. Except for that instance, I never lost more than 1 missile at a time.
Somehow, some way, vehicles were able to maneuver right over those ICBMs and turn them off.
We don't know why they went down, and still don't know. There's no other reason I can think of that would cause the 10 to go off alert within seconds.
We knew it. It wasn't an ordinary man-made machine because we had nothing like that.
After the incident, I was required not to speak to anybody about it.
I attempted to question the security guard, and he said, "Sorry, sir, I've been told to keep quiet." And he was told that, as far as you're concerned, it never happened.
I had to go through a special briefing. This is where they told me, "You're not supposed to say ever again that something happened because nothing happened." Of course, the first thing I did when I got home was, "Hey, hon, guess what happened?"
There was a man from Air Force Office of Special Investigations. All he wanted me to do was to sign this document, stating I would never speak about this again. Once we signed that document, we were released, told to leave, and that was that. I never spoke about any of this until 1994, so it was about 27 years later.
3 years after the Malmstrom incident, in which 10 missiles were shut down, the Air Force released a fact sheet to the public announcing the close of Project Blue Book. And it stated that no UFO reported, investigated, or evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of a threat to our national security. Meaning not even one has represented any kind of national security threat.
That was certainly a lie. Let's use the right word. The Air Force knew full well these were UFO-related incidents, and that UFOs were responsible for the shutdown of these missiles.
We found out later in 1979 that, in fact, a secret memo had circulated called the Bollinger Memo, which stated that any national security cases could continue to be reported through channels already in place. And so it was a complete black and white contradiction between what was being said to the public and what was being said behind the scenes.
There's something that's in our atmosphere that we just don't know what it is. These things seem to be interested in our nuclear capabilities, and that's something that we should be concerned about.
I kept the secret for 40 years. It was a long time to have this burden on the back of my shoulders. I'm normally quiet personality, and I just don't want to be in the limelight. But the public needs to know this.
Robert Salas did not speak out about what happened for many, many years, and it shows how intimidated these people are to come forward. Decades will go by and they won't even talk about it.
Good morning. My name is David Schindley. In 2001, I found an article describing Robert Salas's incident. And when I saw that, I said, oh my God. The incident that he had was almost identical to the one I had. And I experienced just a joyful freedom. And I finally was able to tell my wife my secret. And so, thanks, Robert, for helping me out.
After the incident, the guards had called me and literally begged me to come out and see them, because this was very traumatic experience for the guards. But I just signed a non-disclosure statement, so I had to tell them on the phone that I could not see them. So when I talk about this, I do it partly for those airmen that begged me to come see them, and I just couldn't do it.
There's a shyness and a reluctance on the part of many witnesses, and understandably so, against reporting, because too many have been ridiculed and life has been made somewhat miserable for them.
Dr. Hynek grew increasingly disillusioned by the Air Force's dismissive approach to these sightings and dismissive approach to the evidence.
Hynek gradually realized that this was a subject that demanded serious study.
Back when Hynek was in Project Blue Book, there was a case. It involved a father and his two sons in Idaho. One day they all saw this object just zoom down this gully, down the riverbed, and disappear. They all three saw it. Hynek found it fairly convincing. He ended up writing it off as something with a natural cause. But that was Hynek's official report to Project Blue Book. Why this is significant is years later, when Hynek started to change his mind, he had regrets about that specific case. He said, with that case, I should have said, you know what? It doesn't add up completely. I think there's more going on here. I'm not going to dismiss it. I'm going to try to find out more. So that was kind of the first chink in Hynek's facade as a debunker.
I began to get certain doubts because it was the people themselves. I said to myself, well, now, come on, how much longer am I going to call these people crazy? And when I changed my glasses, you might say, a little bit, and took a view that maybe these people aren't crazy, and began to realize what sort of people they were, good, solid people, I said to myself, well, the time has come to maybe change my attitude.
With the United States Air Force leaving the role behind of taking in UFO investigations, this left a large vacuum that civilian organizations began to fill.
In 1974, J. Allen Hynek founded the Center for UFO Studies, abbreviated CUFOS. This was a civilian group composed of very qualified people that runs the gamut of the average person with enthusiasm to a very highly trained scientist or academic. And the records that they provided are absolutely crucial.
I'm Mark Rodiger, the scientific director of the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. Dr. Hynek mentored me and designated me as his successor. Dr. Hynek was the classic professor. He loved teaching. He also really enjoyed jokes, and a good time. He wasn't stuffy. He had a little twinkle in his eye. People really warmed up to him. Allen was very open-minded, and that is really the background to him being interested in UFOs. UFO groups, they're not massive organizations. In fact, we're now sitting in the basement in my UFO office here in my house. The center is really like a scientific think tank. Dr. Hynek realized that there was a need for a focused professional group to study UFOs. That involves mainly three things: being a place for people to report sightings. Number two is to be a place for reliable information. We publish a journal, a periodical with monographs. And finally, of course, a place to do research. We've stayed pretty close to that mission all through the years.
One of the first things that CUFOS did was establish a national hotline for UFO reporting. They distributed this hotline to law enforcement agencies around the country and said, put this on your bulletin board. If you ever get a call from someone who has seen a UFO, call us on this hotline and we will do the investigation.
Okay. But it didn't look like anything I know of.
But there was a big difference between civilian and military investigations of UFOs. The military has access to other information civilians don't.
I went to see Don Rumsfeld at the White House, mainly because he's a friend of mine, and said to him, look, I have this Center for UFO Studies, and I wanted you to know that should this subject ever get to the presidential or the congressional level, there is a group of scientists who are ready to work on it. And I said, I do have a certain responsibility to these scientists. Are we spinning our wheels? If this work has already been done by somebody else. I said, because of my responsibility to these scientists, I felt that I had a need to know. And he snapped right back at me and says, you do not have a need to know. Now, you interpret that any darn way you want. In any case, you cannot stop scientists from working. And that's the whole point of being a scientist. They're individualists. They're going to do what they damn please anyway.
In the 70s and 80s, in general, government officials were not talking about UFOs. But some presidents were also interested in getting information about UFOs. When Jimmy Carter was the governor of Georgia, in 1969, he had a sighting with a group of other witnesses.
All of them saw a very bright light in the western sky. And it got closer and closer, and then it seemed to stop in its proximity to us. And then the color of it changed from white to blue to red.
Jimmy Carter was very impressed by that. It really impacted him. Then in 1973, he filed a written report on this with a number of civilian UFO groups, so it's on the record. So when he did become president, he approached NASA to see if they would open up a new investigation that could continue what the Air Force had been doing prior to closing down Project Blue Book. The Air Force would not have wanted this to happen 7 years after closing Project Blue Book. So the Air Force jumped in on the process and said to NASA, we don't want you to do this. After a series of exchanges, NASA did decline the president's request.
Under pressure to answer by the end of the year, NASA concluded that it would be pointless to mount a new research effort because of the lack of physical evidence.
It was kind of stunning that a request from the president would have been denied.
If there is no concrete evidence of people from outer space, how do you write a whole book about UFOs?
Well, that's exactly why I called it the UFO Experience instead of something that would have sold more like Sex and the UFO. I called it the UFO Experience because that's what I was talking about, the experience that people had. And you can't convince a person who's had a real UFO experience that he hasn't had it.
In the early 70s, J. Allen Hynek came out with his monumental book called the UFO Experience. It wasn't just about research. He was somebody that would listen and took people seriously who had sightings and had experiences. He would go on lots of TV shows and radio interviews, and he was a public figure advocating for official recognition and study of UFOs.
With the space program taking off, there was a groundswell of interest in outer space.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It was a national movement. And so people's imaginations, of course, run wild. Hollywood was able to capture that and feed people's thirst and imagination, and it led to a long-standing, powerful genre.
May the force be with you.
So UFOs became a cultural, creative, imaginative area, and Hynek's book was a big hit.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Steven Spielberg bought the rights to Hynek's book and hired Dr. Hynek as a technical consultant.
And so Spielberg worked with Hynek in helping to get the facts accurate for his movie Close Encounters.
Yeah, I was very influenced by J. Allen Hynek because he was not looking at UFOs as science fiction, but he was looking at them as science speculation. So I met with him, and I used him, and I picked his brain, and he consulted with me.
Dr. Hynek was the fellow that coined the term close encounters.
Well, a close encounter of the first kind is one is close, but nothing really happened.
Close encounter of the second kind includes physical damage to the environment. That could be landing pad imprints in the grass where a UFO was said to have landed.
And the close encounters of the third kind are the most interesting of all.
Close encounter of the third kind is really when you meet them.
It was clear that Spielberg wanted real science, real data, accurate information about UFOs, and that's why he called on J. Allen Hynek.
They were drawing from real U.S. government information on how these things operated and maneuvered. Hypersonic velocities or fast speeds, instantaneous acceleration, even biological effects, where Richard Dreyfuss, half his face has his sunburn. Those were all observables that we were seeing in the U.S. government, real observables that made their way onto the Hollywood screen. And that's because Steven Spielberg was provided information from people from Project Blue Book.
Along with Hynek, Spielberg also talked to Jacques Vallée, a French scientist who was well known in the UFO field and had written numerous books on the topic.
I had the privilege of working with Dr. Hynek for 5 years. We built the first computer-based data catalog of UFO sightings, starting with the Air Force files, which covered about 20,000 cases.
Les gens sont venus de partout dans le pays.
These people have come from all over their country.
The French scientist in the movie, character of Lacombe, was based loosely on me. France has an official scientific committee for UFOs that includes physicists, the military, including sociologists and psychologists.
By letting the project team leader be a Frenchman, it immediately gave more of a depth to the understanding of UFOs.
In the whole history of America, the movies, it's always, they come from somewhere, they kill somebody, so we bring the tanks, and they destroy all the tanks. That's a very American way of looking at an alien life form.
If everything's ready here on the dark side of the moon, play the 5 tones.
The movie was the first movie in which we were greeting these aliens, and they were coming to us as equal, and we were going to have an intelligent discussion with them, or intelligent exchange.
Close Encounters, it just captured the spirit of the mystery of the phenomenon, the scariness of the phenomenon, and kind of the impact that it has on people.
Whatever the government may think about them, unidentified flying objects seem to be popular with the people. Columbia Pictures reports that its film, Close Encounters of a Third Kind, has grossed $39 million in 3 weeks.
I owe a lot to J. Allen Hynek, his instilling in me a professional's point of view on this kind of field reporting. And he helped me make the movie more credible than it would have been without his existence.
Steven Spielberg actually brought him on set for when they filmed the movie's huge climax at the secret UFO base in Wyoming.
United States Navy, 043431.
Captain. And of course, Close Encounters became a household term because of Steven Spielberg's movie and really catapulted Hynek to a degree of celebrity.
Therefore, will the real Dr. J. Allen Hynek please stand up?
Even though Hynek worked for our government for almost 2 decades, what he was doing in the 70s and 80s seemed to have no impact at all on the government. And sightings continued.
There's the fantastic sightings last year and this year in the Westchester and Putnam County areas. Those are literally out of this world. I can find no logical explanation for them.
I don't know what the hell it is.
We were coming home from grad school, and we were just yakking like we are now, and all of a sudden Doris says, "What are those lights up there?"
I was driving north on 118, and as I was approaching the light here, I looked into the northern sky. I saw what appeared to be a large aircraft with landing lights, flying very low, about 500 feet. And it stopped, and it rotated 180 degrees, and started to head west.
I looked up at Interstate 84, and it was a parking lot. People were out of their cars, blinking lights, pointing up at the sky, and there was that city of lights hovering over in my backyard.
And it went like from night to broad daylight.
And all of a sudden, it's going to land, it's going to land.
When I came to the station, the phones were ringing off the hook. The object came directly over my head, less than 500 feet above me. Covered the whole sky. It was totally quiet, no sound whatsoever.
You could hear a pin drop.
And I said, oh, what do I do with my family? How am I going to handle all this?
What I saw was unbelievable, mind-boggling. The whole town saw what I saw.
Beginning in around 1983, there was an incredibly dramatic series of sightings that took place in the Hudson Valley area of New York State and in Connecticut, which was actually a wave because it took place over years. People would report these UFOs to the police or maybe to local UFO groups, and a lot of people were kind of awed and frightened.
It was a little spooky. How come? Because it was unexplainable. What Jim Brooks saw...
There was a lot of local reporting, some local civilian investigation.
Our researchers have set up a special UFO hotline in Westchester.
But it was something that involved hundreds at least witnesses, if not more.
There was nothing coming from our government, even though these gigantic craft were cruising around over a part of the United States.
The Federal Aviation Administration has joined the Air Force and many astronomers in attributing most UFO sightings to man-made objects and natural phenomenon.
Believe it or not, the planet Venus is a fairly common UFO sighting.
It moved very slowly.
We looked up in the sky, we saw 6 lights in a V shape.
Even after all these witnesses had seen these objects and had reported them to their local police, it still became a kind of a joke.
The head of my school, he said, you know, some people might think you're crazy.
I was the commissioner of motor vehicles, and I was involved in a political race at that time. The last thing I wanted to be known for was little green people or UFOs.
My husband also thought I was nuts, and so I didn't talk about it too much.
What is interesting, tragic, and amusing all at the one and the same time is that lots of people are afraid to talk about it. Their friends will laugh at them and so forth, and we need to let those people feel safe and talk about it.
On August 25th of 1984, Hynek came to the Hudson Valley and he gave a talk at the middle school there. This was the last case that he was involved with before he died, and it made a huge impression on him.
Here's a sketch of the thing going on in Westchester County now. This is large boomerang-shaped object that moves slowly, far below the stall speed of aircraft, moves silently. I've been told by highly responsible witnesses that it is as large as the football field.
It speaks to the importance of the Hudson Valley Wave that J. Allen Hynek came here. He thought it was important enough to speak to the witnesses, to go to the sites.
I spent a weekend with Dr. Hynek. Dr. Hynek could ask you a question, and he'd sit back and he would listen. And if one of my kids jumped into the conversation, he would just kindly just put up his hand and go, "I'll get right back to you," with a little wink. And you were the most important person for that moment he was talking to you. That's the way he made me feel.
It was very important for these witnesses who were not getting any official recognition that somebody like J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who had worked for the government, that he came there and spoke with them and took them seriously.
And we walked through the whole sighting. He wanted to go every place. And every time we made a stop, he said, "What were you feeling? Did you feel anything in your gut? Did you feel connected to this object?"
It made a huge difference to have him on site during the wave.
In the Westchester case in New York, for instance, we had witnesses geographically independent of each other, didn't know each other, and yet reported identically the same things. Now, you cannot call that mass hallucination.
Lack of scientific involvement or government acknowledgement of UFOs encourages people's imaginations to go wild with, what are they hiding?
We called the police when we got home, and they didn't tell us that night, but a couple of days later we were reading they thought they were ultralights. The planes?
The chief meteorologist at the Westchester County Airport, with some 25 years experience, told me that when he saw it, it moved very slowly like a ship docking at a berth. Now, that cannot possibly be ultralights flying in formation. That's just out of the question.
Yeah, the planes flying in formation is one of the reasons cited, including an article in Discover magazine.
This article that was in Discover magazine talks about the pilots who were going up and hoaxing UFOs, and it implies that that's probably what all the sightings were.
Do you hear the engines?
Planes fly all the time. You hear 7,000 people coming out and saying, "Ah, I saw planes over my head." No, they saw something different.
Ultralights, they make noise.
They do make noise.
So we've never had a good explanation.
So these pilots did a huge disservice by creating this hoax situation to confuse everything and to bring a lack of credibility and to give the government something to hang their hat on when they were asked what people were actually seeing.
People began doubting themselves. It kept the entire wave suppressed.
Hynek was just stunned by the fact that this was not getting attention.
The subject came up in the United Nations recently. We have reports from 133 different countries, and the same pattern exists around the world. It's not just localized in one particular country, you see.
So while our government was telling the public that there was nothing to UFOs, that the investigations had all been shut down, documents reveal that officials were, in fact, monitoring cases in other countries.
What they were seeing was very similar to what was seen in the Hudson Valley.
On a rien vu quelque chose de tout à fait incroyable la nuit de lundi.
This map was prepared by Dr. Jacques Vallée. UFO reports are truly global, and they seem to occur in waves, or flaps as they are often called. But notice how the flaps have been distributed throughout the years and over the world.
This is truly an international phenomenon, there's no question about it. There's a very similar pattern, very similar reports. Foreign militaries are also having encounters. The Belgian Air Force had some extraordinary encounters.
Des personnes affirment avoir vu longuement et à plusieurs reprises des objets volants et lumineux de forme triangulaire.
Ils ont vu dans le ciel un phénomène étrange, un ovni.
A few years after the Hudson Valley Wave, a very similar wave occurred in Belgium.
These large black triangles, again, all the characteristics, silent, low, beams of light, hovering.
Belgian authorities would scramble jets in order to try to get a better look at the objects. They wanted to identify what it was that was invading protected airspace over their country. It felt that this was their responsibility.
The F-16s that the Belgian military had tracked these objects on radar. So they actually have radar imagery of the unknown moving through Belgian airspace.
And the contrast from how the Belgian government handled it there versus how our government didn't handle the events in Hudson Valley are really striking. The Belgian Air Force became actively involved with a group of scientists to collect reports from witnesses. They assigned a colonel to head up an investigation.
Voilà, ici vous voyez le vecteur de l'objectif 300 degrés.
And they held a press conference packed with media in which they disclosed everything they knew and how they were approaching this.
350, 400 nœuds.
And the public were encouraged to file reports.
J'ai regardé cette chose passer au-dessus de chez moi. Je pense que je l'estime entre 20 et 25 mètres, peut-être plus. Et alors sans bruit. Il n'y avait pas du tout de bruit.
Air Force officers were coming forward and speaking about it. They gave it a legitimacy that we have yet to see here in this country.
You said the government stopped investigating back in 1969. Do these UFO watchers have any reason to expect the government to get re-involved in investigating these claims?
Right now, they're a bit disappointed the government has not gotten more involved than it has in the last 10 years. But we do know that the CIA and the Defense Department has been doing some research into other sightings in other nations like the Soviet Union and Iran. But in the United States, they seem very skeptical.
The Belgian case was documented by U.S. government officials. Colonel de Brouwer had approached American officials to inquire whether this was ours. And we had told them no. And we had said also, we'd like to know whose it was. So there was a document filed about the Belgian wave, but no document filed about a wave in our own country, at least that we are aware of.
To me, the greatest evidence for the existence of something strange going on is the caliber of many of the witnesses. For instance, in Westchester, we had meteorologists, a Navy test pilot, IBM executives, a priest, are they all saying the same thing, that it is not explainable to them by any conventional explanation?
You just said it, Charlie. That's exactly what they're saying. They're seeing the same things.
You know, there were so many people that saw it. It wasn't, you know, if I saw it alone, I probably wouldn't have told anybody. If the three of us saw it, I might have told my family.
Right.
Yeah. But there were so many people that saw it that I was fine with, you know, spreading the word.
Me too.
And everybody that I told said they were sorry they didn't see it.
A lot of people took solace in the fact that Hynek was a guy who was on their side. If you witnessed a UFO, Hynek was one person who would take you seriously, wouldn't make fun of you, and really try to get a full picture of your experience. And that's so huge to someone who has seen something weird in the sky and doesn't know how to tell anyone about it.
I felt validated. That's the way Dr. Hynek made me feel. So I could say, there's nothing wrong with me, and nothing wrong with my eyes, and nothing wrong with my intuition. They're all intact.
Dr. Hynek was someone who was very alive, very open. He told me once that the reason he became interested in UFOs was about the challenges. about, what is this world? If this is real, what does that mean for human existence?
The last thing Hynek did before leaving this earth was try to understand the nature of the denial and the disconnect among human beings when something this dramatic happens. Hynek wrote an essay. It was a rough draft that was left on his computer when he died. He said, how is it possible that in the United States, where even trivial events are often flashed across the world, only one national TV and radio network carried an account of these utterly astounding sightings? Was no one minding the store? Was everyone asleep at the switch? Hynek was a different person than he was previously when he worked at Project Blue Book. Here he was saying UFOs, they're of scientific interest. The witnesses should be taken seriously. It was just the most profoundly important moment and setting a course of events that continued through the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Starting as a complete skeptic, I underwent a transformation, and now, I guess the best way of saying it is it's an itch that I just have to scratch. I feel that we have a phenomenon that could be of tremendous potential importance to the human race. I feel that strongly about it.
It's a definite UFO or something like that. It just flew right over me.
This is highly restricted airspace. You don't want something up there that doesn't belong there.
The culture as a whole didn't really take UFOs seriously.
I stuck with it despite the level of ridicule for decades.
He described it as a huge ball with lights running around it. He said it was about 4 times bigger than the 747.
And my immediate response was, I want to break the story.